This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Typhoon Podul slams into Taiwan, unleashing powerful winds and heavy rain. Thousands in the storm's path have been evacuated to safety. Now, China claims to have driven away an American warship near the disputed Scarborough Shoal, a transit that the U.S. Navy says was in line with international law. The South Korean prosecutors raid the HQ of jailed ex-president Yoon Suk-yeol to gather evidence of election meddling against his wife, Kim Keon Hee, who was imprisoned yesterday. And Vladimir Putin shares details of his upcoming Alaska summit with Donald Trump over the phone with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Ahead on East Asia tonight, China aggressively adding clean energy sources to its power grid that surpasses the combined efforts of the rest of the world, while the U.S. doubles down on fossil fuel production. Who will win the race to power the future? Typhoon Podul lashing Taiwan with heavy rains and powerful winds. The storm slammed into Taitung County shortly past noon, with winds of up to 191 kilometers per hour. Tainan, Kaohsiung, Hualien and the Penghu Islands are among the areas hardest hit. One person is reportedly missing, while 33 others have been injured. Authorities have shut schools and government offices, while hundreds of flights have been cancelled. And for more on this, CNA's Victoria Jen, she joins us live from Taipei. Victoria, you are in Taipei right now. The situation looks calm there, but how does it compare to some of the areas hit hardest by Typhoon Podul?
Right now, I'm in Neihu. It's one of the busiest business districts in Taipei. As you can see behind me, it's business as usual. There are still a lot of pedestrians and cars traveling on the street. Right now, we can barely feel any rain or strong wind. So basically, in northern Taiwan, the impact of the typhoon is rather minimal. So that's why schools and work remain open. But the situation is completely the opposite in southern and eastern part of Taiwan, where the typhoon made landfall earlier today. Along coastlines, we're seeing waves up to 6 meters high, and also more than 5,000 people have been evacuated from low-lying areas as well as mountainous areas. The government has put 30,000 soldiers on standby for any emergency and rescue missions. Now, the authorities are warning that if the rain continues, there's likely to trigger landslides in mountainous areas as well as floodings in low-lying areas. So authorities are urging residents to stay vigilant and take necessary precautions to minimize damage.
Victoria, I'm glad where you're at, Taipei. It looks relatively calm, the situation there. You mentioned 30,000 soldiers are on standby, but aside from that, how else is the government responding to the storm situation in the south and eastern parts of Taiwan?
Well, there's a complete shutdown in much of the southern and eastern part of Taiwan. Now, schools and offices in 9 counties and cities have been closed today. They include Hualien, Taidong, and Kaohsiung, because these are areas where the storm had made its path. And also, traffic has been heavily disrupted. All domestic flights have been canceled, and some international flights have been canceled or rescheduled because of the typhoon. Ferries to offshore island and also on to the other side of the strait have also been put on hold. Now, Weather Bureau forecasts that there is likely to be up to 600 millimeters of rain pouring down in the mountainous areas in southern Taiwan. Now, this is a worrying sign because this part of the region has already been hit by flooding in the past couple of weeks. And so they're worrying that this is going to undermine the recovery efforts that is currently underway. So the government is not letting their guard down. They're sending in thousands of rescuers and also tens of thousands of soldiers on standby to engage in any rescue operations because they do not want to repeat such disasters from happening again.
All right, many thanks for that report. Do stay dry. CNA's Victoria Jan live from Taipei. Well, China's coastal regions are bracing for Podul's arrival. Hong Kong issued its standby signal number 1 earlier today. That's the lowest level in the city's 5-tier typhoon warning system. It will determine on Thursday if a strong wind signal is needed. Over in Fujian province, authorities are preparing for the storm's second landfall. Ahead of time, ships and boats have already been recalled to harbour as inspections were carried out at docked vessels to ensure they're properly secured. Now, the storm is expected to hit local transport. Ticket sales for some passenger train services have already been suspended. Japanese authorities are warning residents in southwestern Kyushu region and other areas of the risk of landslides after record-breaking rain lashed the western parts of the country. Weather officials say the affected regions were hit with about twice as much rain in just 12 hours as the average for the whole of August. They add that intense downpours have caused the ground to loosen and damaging riverbanks and revetments. Residents are also urged to remain on alert for flooding. Meantime, authorities have also issued heat stroke warnings across 16 prefectures in western Japan, with extreme hot weather forecast for many of the rain-hit areas. Temperatures are expected to reach as high as 37 degrees Celsius. In other news, China says it monitored and drove away a U.S. destroyer which was sailing near the disputed Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. It is the first known U.S. military operation within the contested waters in at least 6 years. The Chinese military said that the USS Higgins had entered the area without approval, adding that the move seriously violated China's sovereignty and undermined peace in the South China Sea. The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet has defended the vessel's voyage near the shoal, saying it is consistent with international law. Washington regularly carries out what it calls freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea. Well, this latest incident comes a day after the Philippines accused Chinese vessels of, quote, dangerous maneuvers and unlawful interference during a supply mission around the Scarborough Shoal. China's Coast Guard said it took so-called necessary measures to expel Philippine vessels from the waters. Now, Japan says that it has provided what it calls military asset protection to the British military for the first time. The show of cooperation comes as both countries seek to strengthen bilateral defense ties amid growing global security challenges. Now, Tokyo says that its maritime self-defense force warships guarded Britain's Prince of Wales aircraft carrier Striker Group during a 9-day multilateral exercise in the Western Pacific earlier this month. The British strike group is on a visit to Japan, making a port call at Yokosuka, southwest of the capital, Tokyo. Britain is the third country after the US and Australia to receive such support from Japan's self-defense force. Constraints on SDF operations have been loosened following a Japanese security law in 2016 that allowed defense personnel to guard foreign vessels, aircraft, and weapons engaged in activities to help defend Japan. Now, at least one person has been taken to the hospital after a yacht and a cargo ship collided in waters off southern Japan. Public broadcaster NHK says that the survivor pulled from the water was unconscious at the time of rescue. The Japan Coast Guard reported that a 492-ton gravel transport vessel clashed into a yacht near Hoto Island around 8 a.m. local time. Well, that's located about 2 kilometers northeast of Japan's southern Oita prefecture. Authorities suspect that more individuals may have been thrown into the sea. A search operation is underway to find several others reportedly missing from the yacht. Authorities have yet to determine the cause of the collision. Investigations are ongoing, but it remains uncertain how many were on board both vessels. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will meet Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba in Tokyo next week. Talks will center on strengthening trilateral cooperation with Washington and regional peace as well as stability. Lee and Ishiba met on the sidelines of the G7 meetings in Canada in June, where they agreed to boost trade and cooperation against North Korea's nuclear program. Since taking office in June, Lee has pledged to strengthen Seoul's alliance with Washington and trilateral cooperation with Tokyo. Calls have also been made in South Korea to boost collaboration with Japan in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff hikes. Now, a U.S.-South Korea summit will be held in Washington the day after, with talks focusing on trade and defense cooperation. Analysts say Trump's push to reset global trade has drawn the two neighbors closer together. Now, Japan's chief trade negotiator, Ryose Akazawa, has voiced his support for Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba in the event the ruling Liberal Democratic Party calls for a leadership race. Mr. Akazawa, who is Mr. Ishiba's right-hand man, told a TV program that he would be honored to support the Japanese leader should he choose to run. The minister's comments comes amid speculation over whether Mr. Ishiba could soon step down or call for an early race after his party's bruising defeat at the recent upper house elections. Calls for the Prime Minister's resignation have grown within the LDP in recent times. But Mr. Ishiba has stressed earlier that he will not step down for the time being to deal with trade negotiations with the U.S. NHK's latest poll of some 1,100 respondents over the weekend, however, shows that more people, or 49% polled, support Mr. Ishiba's plan to remain in office. 40% oppose the move. And among the LDP supporters, 69% were in favor, with 23% against the leader's decision to stay on. Some polled also felt that the ruling party should not be wasting time on internal bickering. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, Beijing switching to a consumption-led economic model to spur spending. And Chinese developer Road King on the brink of a bond default, adding to risks in the domestic property sector in Hong Kong. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. It is now time for some business news with Roland Lim. Now, Roland, China's property crisis now in its fourth year of paralysis, and it seems that it's claiming new victims.
That's right, Oteli. We have many developers, big and small, that have folded, and the slump drags on. A Chinese developer, Road King Infrastructure, looks on course to default in its bond payments of more than $11 billion. The failure to do so would make it the first bond default by a Hong Kong builder since China's property crisis began in 2021 and the deepened contagion risks for the territory. Road King is a small-sized developer earning majority of its revenues from mainland China. Some of its bondholders have not received coupon payments after a 30-day grace period expired yesterday. Holding an outstanding $2.3 billion in senior notes, Road King in June proposed to restructure the debt for the second time in a row. The proposals did not receive enough support from bondholders to pass. Mainland China and Hong Kong property markets have been under pressure in the past few years, with plunging sales and tightening liquidity. On the mainland, in particular, many companies have defaulted. The biggest of them all, China Evergrande, the world's most heavily indebted property developer, is due to be delisted from the Hong Kong exchange later this month. Now, Canada says it is, quote, deeply disappointed with China's decision to slap anti-dumping duties on canola, the latest escalation in a trade spat between Beijing and Ottawa. China yesterday slapped a provisional 75.8% duty on Canadian canola effective tomorrow. And this comes after a preliminary ruling by the country's Commerce Ministry, which deemed Canadian imports as dumping, with a final ruling due when investigations are concluded. Analysts say the move provides an opportunity for Australia. Now, Canberra's canola has been shut out from the Chinese market since 2020 over agricultural quarantine rules. Canada is China's biggest supplier of canola, exporting some $3.6 billion worth of the crop last year. The spat started last August with Canadian levies on Chinese electric vehicles of 100% and 25% for steel and aluminium. Beijing hitting back with a 100% tariff of around $2.6 billion worth of agricultural goods, including some canola products, as well as aquatic products and pork. Prices of rapeseed meal, also known as canola, in Canada, jumping the most in 2 years on supply concerns following Beijing's decision to place levies on imports from Canada. The most active futures surging by about 5% after gaining as much as 6.4% earlier. China is pledging more financial support to boost domestic consumption. In the latest push to spur spending, the government plans to offer interest subsidies on loans to households and businesses. Now, it'll subsidize loans by as much as $418 for each borrower over the next 12 months. The plan involves 6 major state-owned banks, 12 joint stock commercial banks, and 5 consumer finance firms, including WeBank and Ant Group. Unlike previous policies that require banks to offer cheaper loans, the government will shoulder the subsidy costs in the new plan in a bid to safeguard banks' profit margins. Analysts say the policy is expected to boost the willingness of households to borrow, while allowing banks to maintain consumer loan rates at a current level above 3%. Analysts at China Merchant Securities estimate the subsidy would stimulate $696 billion of newly issued loans. South Korea says it plans to spend more than $150 billion through to 2030 to support President Lee Jae-myung's campaign promises, with funding raised through higher taxes and budget cuts. Officials say the plan will allocate funds to some 123 projects covering innovation, growth, social welfare, and foreign policy, along with significant investments into artificial intelligence as part of Seoul's goal to become a top 3 AI power. The government says it'll pursue reconciliation with North Korea through peace initiatives, while also strengthening its military capabilities against nuclear and cyber threats. Mr. Lee's administration seeks to raise an additional $26 billion in revenue by 2030 through higher capital gain taxes, some of which have faced resistance, forcing the government to rethink its stance. Japan has launched anti-dumping investigations into a type of steel typically used in construction from China and South Korea. The probe follows a petition in April filed by Nippon Steel, Kobe Steel, and other domestic makers, claiming that weaker domestic demand and a shift to cheaper imports have forced them to cut prices. Japan also began investigating nickel-based stainless cold-rolled steel sheets and strips imported from China and Taiwan last month. The Trade Ministry and the Ministry of Finance plans to complete the investigations within a year before deciding on possible anti-dumping duties. And China's tech giant Tencent turning in robust gaming revenue for its second quarter results. The company managed double-digit growth in most major business segments as it speeds up spending on AI research. It's also been including AI-driven enhancements to its products. For the 3 months ended June, Tencent turned in close to $26 billion in revenue. That's an increase of 14.5%, which beat estimates. While net adjusted income, well, that came in at around $8.8 billion, a jump of about 10% on year. The strong performance fueled by flagship titles including Honor of Kings and Dungeon and Fighter Mobile. The world's biggest games publisher starts off a closely watched earnings season for Chinese big tech firms after the success of DeepSeek. Checking in now on the markets as hopes of U.S. interest rate cuts following soft inflation data cheer equity investors. Japan's Nikkei hitting second record high, breaching that 43,000 mark for the first time. It gained by as much as 1.7% at the close, while the broader Topics index advanced by as much as 1.2%, also a record. Mainland China and Hong Kong stocks rose for the third session, with the Shanghai benchmark posting its highest close in nearly 4 years. And European equities are also broadly moving higher after Wall Street's record high overnight.
Global markets are on a tear, and helping us to explain what's driving this market rally, none other than Roland Lin, yet again. So, Roland, let's talk about the S&P 500. That notched a record close overnight. Nikkei 225 crossed 43,000 for the first time. So what gives?
Right, yeah. So Wall Street, driven by the benign U.S. headline inflation numbers, 0.2% month-on-month, 2.7% year-on-year. So that means that that's given enough of a boost for the Fed to actually cut interest rates. In fact, the possibility of a Fed cut of 25% next month is as high as 90% now. So they're expecting a cut by the Fed. That positive sentiment spilled over to Asian semiconductor tech stocks, benefiting Japan. And of course, if you remember, weaker yen means that there's more foreign investments into Japan. And of course, not to mention, with a weaker yen means that exporter stocks in Japan will benefit from forex exchange gains, especially when they repatriate their profits back into Japan. So all that bringing up stocks worldwide.
But isn't much of the U.S. rally relying on the mega cap tech as well as the AI-heavy stocks, especially the so-called Magnificent Seven?
Yes, at the heart of the tech rise at the S&P, it really is the Mag 7. You're talking about Apple, we're talking about Microsoft, Nvidia, Meta, Alphabet, I missed out Tesla. They account for something like 34% of the S&P today. It used to be just 12% 10 years ago. So it's quite a big weightage. And that alone is actually driving most of the S&P gains simply because of the bets in terms of AI as well as cloud computing. And as Morgan Stanley says, it is now currently the most crowded trade, the Mag 7 stocks on the S&P 500.
Good to know. What about market sentiment though? How is that shaping up alongside this tech-fueled momentum?
Well, we have the VIX index, the volatility index. It's also known as the fear gauge. And it gives investors a good indication of current sentiment, and it's currently lingering surprisingly at 15 to 16 on the index as compared to say 20 just a year ago. So that's actually signaling low volatility expectations. So what I'm trying to say is that it's actually supporting or reinforcing the bullish sentiment on the stock market right now. But you know, the low volatility could also mean that it's the quiet before the storm. So if there are any bad news, like, for example, geopolitical shocks, if inflation becomes sticky, well, the VIX index could easily go up again.
Okay, so all in tech and AI, they're leading the rally right now. Sentiment seems calm. What does that tell us about the sustainability of the rally?
Well, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, look, it's a two-edged sword. The rally rests on three pillars. We're talking about AI capital investments, whether there's enough of a boost to spending on the global tech supply chain. Then there's, of course, the expectations that for the markets, there will be a 60 basis point cut by the end of this year. And thirdly, the Mag 7 themselves, that they continue to outperform in terms of profits and thereby justify their lofty valuations. And speaking of which, the downside to this, of course, is that on the S&P 500, valuations are looking rather lofty. They're about 25 times price earnings, forward earnings, that is. And so the fear is that it might be a little bit too high. And of course, we're talking about inflation as well. Core inflation, not the headline inflation, core inflation, that's still at 3.1%. And that's proving that services inflation is rather sticky. So that might actually hinder interest rate cuts in the future as well. So bottom line is that, yes, you're right. Stock investors, that is, they're betting on big tech, they're betting on a rate cut, and they're not so much interested in the state of the economy right now.
All right. Well, thanks so very much for all that data, Roland. Always very helpful to have you here chatting with us. Okay, well, guess it's time now for another break. But coming up next on East Asia Tonight, South Korea's former First Ladies formally booked into a detention facility, jailed at the same time as her ex-president husband, Yoon Suk-yeol, as prosecutors pursue a widening criminal probe against the two. And China leads the world in clean energy production as the U.S. pulls back on its commitments under the Trump administration. So what does this mean for the future of the industry? We'll be speaking to an expert for insights right after this break. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Large swathes of southern and eastern Taiwan shuts down after Typhoon Podul made landfall on the island. The wife of impeached former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol arrested. Kim Keon Hee taken into custody over allegations of stock fraud, bribery, and illegal influence peddling. Russia and North Korea vowing to boost cooperation as President Vladimir Putin shares details of his upcoming summit with U.S. leader Donald Trump that's aimed at ending Moscow's war with Kyiv. Now, there's been a fourfold increase in solar and wind energy's combined output globally over the past 10 years. And China has been leading the way in renewable energy production, outpacing the US and Europe. Now, according to the Statistical Review of World Energy, while China relied mostly on coal when it comes to its total energy use last year, renewables took up a sizable share of that pie, outpacing nuclear and hydro energy. Now, the U.S., by contrast, sourced about 6% of its energy in 2024 from renewables, although it uses significantly less coal than China. Well, the data is the latest in a trend where China is building on its title as the world's largest renewable energy investor. According to the State Grid Energy Research Institute, China is expected to bolster its national power grid with 500 gigawatts from renewable sources this year. Now, the country aims to have 80% of its total energy mix coming from non-fossil fuel sources by 2060. The U.S., though, remains a top exporter of fossil fuels in the world and, in line with Trump administration policy, has been drilling enough to cover its energy needs. Mr. Trump has upended half a decade of U.S. green industrial policy, clawing back billions of dollars in credits and grants, supercharging energy innovation. Now, unlike the United States, China doesn't have much oil or gas of its own relative to its huge population. Beijing's renewables investments seek to eliminate dependence on imported fossil fuels. While it is still heavily reliant on energy imports, China met about 25% of its total energy demand in 2024. Renewables helped Beijing avoid importing around 87 exajoules over the past 5 years. That is more than Europe's total energy demand in 2024. Now, lots of numbers there, but to help break it all down for us, we're going to bring in Carlos Torres-Diaz, who's the Senior Vice President, Head of Power, Rystad Energy, and he is speaking to us from the Norwegian capital, Oslo. Well, thanks very much, Carlos, for joining us this evening. So let's talk about China's edge here. China has the patents, they've got the supply chains, the customers even. Is it fair to say that China has really outmaneuvered the West in the clean energy race, not just technologically, but strategically as well?
Yes, definitely. China is leading the way when it comes to renewable energy development. In fact, it's installing 10 times more renewable energy capacity today than the US. And it's installing even more than the rest of the world combined. And there's several factors for this. As you've already pointed out, China has a lot of the best technology for solar and wind and batteries, and also a lot of the manufacturing capacity. So more than 90% of the manufacturing capacity, for example, for solar components, is in China. So then this allows them to source the equipment at a lower cost and make the renewable energy a lot more competitive there than in other regions.
Yeah, but how do we even begin to explain Washington's decision to double down on fossil fuels just when the rest of the world, we're all shifting to renewables?
Well, the main reason is that the US was depending a lot on these Chinese components to be able to develop renewable capacity. So they're wanting to cut this dependency. And on the other hand, the US has a lot of fossil fuel resources themselves, right? So they have been prioritizing the use of gas in the power sector. And they have been expanding their generation capacity from gas while sacrificing some renewable energy developments. So it's more like a strategic decision to be able to be more independent from Chinese imports.
But we have seen the numbers there. I mean, a lot of numbers we were sharing earlier. I mean, China producing the solar panels, the wind turbines, EVs, batteries, all of that. I mean, at unmatched scale and cost. Would you then say, Carlos, that China's clean tech is now simply too cheap for the world to ignore?
Yes, definitely. Like the US could be harming themselves by not using Chinese technology because, as you say, it can be cheaper to produce electricity with renewable sources, even if you're relying on imports from China. So definitely now, today, it's cheaper to produce electricity from solar and wind in most cases, rather than using fossil fuels. So the US shouldn't really be just cutting down their investments in renewable energy. They should maybe continue to develop new capacity for gas, as they have plentiful amounts of gas, but they should also continue to use renewable energies to be able to have a more diverse energy mix to meet the increasing demand.
And I want to talk about China's dominance of rare earths and components. We've seen how they've used that to leverage, during trade truce negotiations and all of that. But how vulnerable is the rest of the world to Beijing's supply chain control of what we've mentioned about the rare earths and the components?
Well, there is huge dependency on rare earths and all this, batteries and solar panels. The world has been trying to diversify this supply chain. Australia, for example, is now trying to mine some rare earths to cut dependency on China and also to be able to export to the rest of the world. But also when it comes to the technological development of renewable energy and batteries, the world just hasn't been able to match Chinese technology. The costs in other regions continue to be higher and also less efficient. So then China is way ahead when it comes to technological development that is difficult for the rest of the world to catch up with.
Yeah, and also, we can see massive Chinese investments in all these emerging markets, Brazil, Kenya, Pakistan, for instance. I mean, then the West also losing influence in these emerging markets?
Yeah, for sure. Like this has been a great opportunity for China to be more present in emerging markets. A lot of the new power capacity that is being developed in Africa, for example, and in Latin America is coming from Chinese components, but also it's being financed by the Chinese banks and being developed by Chinese companies. So this has helped China open new markets for their supplies and definitely have more strategic presence across the rest of the world.
And what about nuclear fusion? I mean, it seems like it's still an energy source, still under development, but also at this rate that China is going, do you think they're going to be leading in that department?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of speculation about nuclear fusion. There has been some news that maybe China has been able to have some progress when developing this technology. There's still no clear evidence that this is really happening. On the other hand, when it comes to traditional nuclear, definitely China is also leading the way, developing also more capacity than the rest of the world combined, and being able to bring the cost of nuclear conventional capacity at the lower cost. So then this is also opening a new area for the Chinese energy sector.
So all in, I mean, right now it seems like China is leading the way. But, if you could just look into your crystal ball 10 years from now, do you see the world being led by solar, by wind? And which country do you think would be writing those rules and of the future? And what would that future look like?
Well, we were actually very optimistic about more solar and wind capacity being developed worldwide because, as I already mentioned, today it's cheaper to produce electricity with these two sources than with most of the other alternatives. So it makes sense to develop as much capacity from renewable sources as possible. And given that China has such a strong presence in this sector, it's probably likely that they will continue to dominate the sector and be number one when it's supplying these components and also continuing to develop the largest capacity inland. So definitely China will be having a more strategic position globally when it comes to an energy angle.
Well, thanks so very much for sharing your insights. We've certainly learned a lot there. Carlos Torres-Diaz, Senior Vice President, Head of Power, Rystad Energy. Now, turning our attention to other news now. In South Korea, prosecutors have raided the headquarters of jailed ex-president Yoon Suk-yeol to collect evidence in an election meddling case against his wife, Kim Keon Hee. A former First Lady was imprisoned yesterday on a whole range of charges, including stock manipulation, corruption, and influence peddling. Kim appeared at the Seoul Central District Court yesterday for a hearing on her potential arrest. Yonhap reports that the court ordered her detention over concerns she could destroy evidence. Well, she denies all criminal charges which are punishable by years in prison. Kim and her husband are the country's first presidential couple to be jailed simultaneously. The former First Lady has been officially booked into Seoul's Nambu Detention Center, where she will spend most of her time in a solitary cell, equipped with a small table and a mattress on the floor. Due to Kim's high-profile status, her daily routine is staggered to avoid overlapping with other inmates. Now, Kim Keon Hee is facing 16 criminal charges, but it was 3 key cases that led to her arrest after prosecutors said they had strong enough evidence. Now, the first charge concerns her alleged role in manipulating stock prices of Deutsche Motors, a local car dealer, between 2009 and 2012. Prosecutors say she made hundreds of thousands of dollars from that scheme. And the second involves political interference. Ms. Kim allegedly helped a politician secure the governing party's nomination in a 2022 parliamentary by-election. And a third centers around luxury gifts. One item under scrutiny, a Van Cleef pendant said to be worth $43,000, which she wore at a NATO summit. She's accused of failing to declare it as an asset. The spokesperson claimed it was a fake, but prosecutors say it is genuine. Ms. Kim is also accused of accepting 2 Chanel bags and a diamond necklace from a religious group in exchange for influence in business dealings. Critics say she and her husband, former President Yoon Suk-yeol, were shielded from scrutiny while in office. That changed after his impeachment, with Yoon on trial for insurrection over his botched martial law attempt. Both of them now find themselves behind bars, held in separate detention centers. A jailed former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak has won a court battle, allowing him to pursue a legal bid for house arrest. The country's top court has unanimously dismissed an appeal to block Najib from pursuing access to a royal document. The addendum order, allegedly issued as part of a royal pardon, is said to allow the ex-premier to serve his sentence at home instead of in a jail. A 3-member panel of the federal court says it accepted the existence of the document, but that it was not in a position to determine its authenticity. Najib has been seeking to compel authorities to confirm the existence of the order and execute it. He has been in jail since August 2022 for his role in the 1MDB scandal. And CNA's Afifa Arifin explains to us the significance of the verdict for Mr. Najib.
We saw that the federal court has cleared the way for Najib Razak to challenge the government over this royal addendum, which is that alleged order from the former king that could allow Najib to serve the rest of his sentence under house arrest. So in a unanimous decision this morning, the 3-judge panel of the federal court had dismissed the Attorney General's bid to block Najib's judicial review. And what this means is that the case will return to the High Court for a full hearing of its merits. The court, in its decision, had said that it accepted the existence of this addendum order, but was not in a position to determine if it was authentic or if it was truly issued as part of that royal addendum, which had halved Najib's sentence and fine. Now, this ruling doesn't grant Najib's house arrest, but it keeps the legal door open for him, and it also thrusts this controversy back into the spotlight. For Najib, this ruling just gives him a legal avenue to argue that his incarceration terms should be changed, potentially allowing him to leave prison if the High Court upholds the addendum's validity. It also puts a lot of pressure on the government to answer or defend how the Attorney General's chambers handled the matter, particularly over questions about why the document wasn't disclosed earlier. So it's not over for Najib, but he still has some legal cases ongoing. I mean, some of the 1MDB charges linked against him have already been dropped, but he's still awaiting the verdict of one of the biggest trials he's facing over the 1MDB scandal, with the court expected to hear closing arguments in October. He has, of course, denied all of these charges. Now, according to political observers, the case, is really likely to intensify debate over institutional independence, over accountability, especially with Najib still quite a dominant figure in Malaysian politics.
Our time now for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight. A South Korean entrepreneur behind 2 cryptocurrencies that lost some $40 billion pleads guilty to fraud charges in the U.S. And China sanctions 2 EU banks in a tit-for-tat response to the European bloc for adding 2 Chinese banks to a Russia-related sanctions list. Fallen crypto mogul Do Kwon at a court hearing in New York has admitted to 2 charges that he had previously denied in January. A 33-year-old also faces charges back at home in South Korea and could be transferred abroad after serving half of his sentence in the U.S.
Do Kwon, the South Korean entrepreneur behind the failed cryptocurrencies Terra USD and Luna, pleaded guilty at a New York court on Tuesday to 2 U.S. charges of conspiracy to defraud and wire fraud. He admitted to misleading investors and committing fraud while leading Terraform Labs, the Singapore-based company that launched the 2 tokens. Their collapse in 2022 wiped out an estimated $40 billion in investor wealth. At his hearing, Kwon admitted to making false and misleading statements about the stability of Terra USD, a so-called stablecoin designed to maintain a value of $1. Prosecutors alleged that when its value fell below that dollar peg, he told investors an algorithm restored the coin's value, but that this was false, and that Kwon arranged for a company to secretly buy millions of dollars of Terra USD to prop up the price. Prosecutors say this boosted investor confidence, driving up the value of Luna and other Terraform products to as much as $50 billion by the spring of 2022. Kwon apologized for his conduct in court after initially denying the charges. Manhattan U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton, in a statement, called the case one of the largest frauds in history. Kwon now faces up to 25 years in prison. The prosecution says the government has agreed to recommend no more than 12 years if he fully accepts responsibility for his crimes. Sentencing is set for December 11th.
European and Ukrainian leaders will hold virtual talks with U.S. President Donald Trump later today, on Wednesday. Well, they're hoping to lock in support for Kyiv's interests ahead of Mr. Trump's in-person meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in 2 days to discuss the war in Kyiv. Now, it will be a top-level video conference involving U.S. and EU leaders, as well as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, which has been confirmed by the White House. There will be 2 rounds of calls, the first among European leaders and heads of EU and NATO. They will then speak to U.S. President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance in the second round. Now, the push comes amid concerns that Kyiv could be pressured into giving up land. Mr. Trump had earlier said that territory swaps may be needed, but Mr. Zelensky has ruled out ceding ground to Russia, saying Ukraine will not withdraw troops from the Donbas region, which Moscow wants. EU leaders insist Kyiv should be able to decide its own future and that international borders must not be changed by force. And Will Denslow explains what we can expect from the upcoming call between the leaders.
The White House has described his upcoming meeting with Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin as a listening exercise. As far as Kyiv is concerned and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, as well as Kyiv's allies in Europe, they'll be very much hopeful that what President Trump hears, he doesn't like what he hears from Russia's president. That will be a key point that will be discussed. First of all, when President Zelensky, who is travelling to Berlin for face-to-face meetings with several European allies, including German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who is hosting this meeting, to really have a same page of what are Europe's priorities, what they want to communicate to Donald Trump, and how to respond following that meeting on Friday between the US and Russian presidents. Then, of course, it's the opportunity for them to communicate that directly to the US president. We've seen momentum shift from President Trump being hostile towards Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier this year. We remember that blowout meeting in the Oval Office a few months ago. Recently, Donald Trump has threatened Russia with sanctions. The hope is for Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukrainian and European partners is that the pendulum doesn't swing again towards Donald Trump having a more favourable view of Moscow's position.
Russia and North Korea are vowing to strengthen cooperation ahead of President Putin's talks with Mr. Trump. The remarks come after the Russian leader earlier held a phone call with North Korean Kim Jong-un. Well, North Korean state media KCNA confirmed the phone call but did not mention that meeting. KCNA says that Mr. Putin thanked North Korea for its military support in Russia's war against Ukraine, specifically in the Western Kursk region. He praised what he called the bravery and sacrifice of North Korean troops. South Korean intelligence says that more than 10,000 North Korean soldiers have been sent to support Russian troops, and more may be on the way. China has banned business with 2 EU banks today in a tit-for-tat response to the European bloc. The 2 banks are UAB Urbo Bankas and AB Mano Bankas. Both are from Lithuania, one of Beijing's strongest critics in Europe. The sanctions are immediate, banning Chinese entities and individuals from doing any transactions, cooperation or other activities with the 2 banks. Just last month, the EU added 2 Chinese banks to a sanctions list of companies supporting Russia in its war with Ukraine. Beijing has called on the bloc to correct its, quote, wrongdoing. It is also asking Brussels to stop actions that harm Beijing's interests and China-EU collaboration. Relations have been tense since the Russia-Ukraine war broke out. Brussels has criticized Beijing for being too close to Moscow. And before we go, an unhappy ending for McDonald's Japan's latest Happy Meal promotion following reports of fights and food wastage. Well, images like this, piles of uneaten Happy Meals known as Happy Set in Japan, were all over Japanese social media over the weekend as crowds flocked to the fast food chain to get their hands on the accompanying merchandise. But what exactly were they chasing? Well, Pokemon trading cards. A promotional campaign between McDonald's and Pokemon was launched on Saturday, where every Happy Meal came with an exclusive pack of Pokemon cards and a toy as well. Well, this promotion was not the first tie-up between McDonald's and Pokemon. This campaign featured a new card depicting Pikachu grabbing a burger. Now, the fast food chain limited purchases to 5 sets per customer, but scalpers reportedly used the mobile app to buy the meals in bulk and discarded the food. Now, collecting Pokemon cards is popular with both adults and children, with some extremely limited ones selling for up to $1,000 or more. Cards have been listed on e-commerce platforms for several times the price of the Happy Meal, which usually retails just over 500 yen or $3. The fast food chain has since apologized for cutting short the promotion and that it is working to prevent such a situation from happening again by, quote, imposing stricter quantity restrictions and working with e-commerce SITs to curb resale activity. And that's all we've got for you for this Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can also look for us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.